So you've actually managed to speak exclusively to one of the photographers that was involved in the chase. What did he have to say?
Yeah, I have, Ben. I think the one thing that everyone agrees on is that pursuit, and everyone's describing it as that, started outside the Ziegfeld Theatre here after that award ceremony, and that's when opinions differ. The Sussexes, as you say, are describing this as a relentless pursuit, a highly aggressive paparazzi, a near catastrophic car chase. The New York Police Department toning it down, saying actually it was a challenging journey for them. And the photographer I've been out with in a car that was part of that pursuit says, listen, it was their drivers that were making things really, really dangerous. It was one of them who was involved there really at the cutting edge of what was going on yesterday. Clear from talking to him that the couple didn't really play the game that many celebrities do with the paparazzi here in New York City. And this at a time that Prince Harry, well, he's in court in London against the Home Office, or has a case there because of a lack of security. My report, I must warn you, has flashing images.
The man behind the wheel is one of the photographers that Harry and Meghan accuse of causing a near catastrophic car chase.
We got on the highway, then we went north, then we came back south.
The photographer, who wants to keep his own identity hidden, says it was the royal couple's drivers that made it dangerous.
His driver made the situation extra tense.
And do you think that person drove dangerously through New York City?
Yes. There was zigzagging, there was cutting off, there was like coming super close to the cars, squeezing, wedging.
The Duke and Duchess were here in New York to pick up an award and left with Meghan's mother, Doria Ragland. From there, they were followed on a journey that took them around large areas of the city, eventually ending up at the 19th Precinct Police Station, where they jumped into a taxi.
Paparazzis, they just came out of nowhere and just started taking pictures and flashing. It was like a light show. And Prince Harry and his wife and the other lady, they were nervous and they looked scared.
Whilst New York City's mayor was concerned, he has questioned the couple's version of events. Others too believe the story may be exaggerated.
As the late Queen memorably said, recollections may vary, and this is a classic case of where Meghan and Harry's view varies very much from that of the NYPD and the Mayor's office.
After Princess Diana, Harry's mother, died in a car crash pursued by paparazzi, Harry's talked about his fears of history repeating itself.
Were they reacting that they were in a bad place?
There was a moment where there was an obvious smile on Meghan's face. I think he got a video of me.
New York police say thankfully there were no collisions, no injuries, and so far no arrests. Richard Gaisford, Good Morning Britain, New York City.
We're joined to discuss this by former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng, the Mirror's Kevin Maguire. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for joining us. And also from New York, let's go and join royal commentator Victoria Arbiter. Good morning to you, Victoria. Thanks for joining us this morning. There's sort of varying reports as we're sort of, disseminating all the information that's coming out. What the Duke and Duchess and their team have said seems to differ from what the New York police and the New York mayor have said about what actually happened. What have you taken from what you've seen so far?
Good morning to you. Well, I think really one of the biggest takeaways for me is that the wording of that statement was unfortunate. It was incredibly dramatic. And at the time when it was released, we were led to believe that really Harry and Meghan's lives could quite possibly have been in danger, along with those pedestrians that could have been on the street. But because the language was so dramatic, it compelled people to really investigate and see what happened. And as a result, the NYPD, the mayor, the picture agency, and indeed the taxi driver that was involved as well have all pushed back against this story. And so now a lot of questions have been raised. I think perhaps if a slightly more measured response had been put out about what had happened, then maybe we wouldn't have quite so many questions at this point. But I think it's a developing story and one that the NYPD is clearly going to have to investigate further.
I mean, let's have a little look, actually, and listen, if we can, to the mayor. This was the New York City mayor talking at a news conference about what he'd heard, because this, as Victoria's saying, what he's describing and what he understands of what can happen in New York City certainly seems at odds with what they've said.
I would find it hard to believe that there was a 2-hour high-speed chase. That would be, I find it hard to believe, but we will find out the exact duration of it. But if it's 10 minutes, a 10-minute chase is extremely dangerous in New York City. We have a lot of traffic, a lot of movement, a lot of people are using our streets.
But you see, it may not have felt like that to them. I mean, is that part of it, Victoria, that, as you say, the statement that was put out initially came from a place of emotion? We have that statement, actually. I can give it to you. The relentless pursuit lasting more than 2 hours resulted in multiple near collisions involving other drivers on the road, pedestrians and 2 NYPD officers. While being a public figure comes with a level of interest from the public, it should never come at the cost of anyone's safety. Dissemination of these images, given the ways in which they were obtained, encouraged a highly intrusive practice that is dangerous to all involved. I mean, clearly this was very triggering to Harry, wasn't it? And probably to Meghan too, for what she's been through.
I think that's exactly the right word, Kate, triggering. And it's obvious why. We know that Diana died because she was being driven through a tunnel at high speed by a drunk driver. She wasn't wearing her seatbelt, but another part of that was she was being chased by the paparazzi. You may remember in the Netflix docuseries that came out several months ago, there is one scene in particular that I thought was very striking. Harry and Meghan in New York City again. They were driving along the West Side Highway and the chauffeur suggested that they were being followed by a photographer on a moped. We never saw that photographer, but you could see immediately the kind of reaction that it garnered in Prince Harry. He became very anxious. He kept looking out the rear view window. He was clearly very troubled by the idea of being followed by a photographer. So yes, it is perhaps quite easy to be dismissive and laugh about the fact that New York is always gridlocked. It's not exactly a chase, but maybe chase wasn't quite the right word, I suspect. And I don't want to put words in their mouths, but perhaps they felt hunted in that moment. They were completely surrounded. It was a pursuit. And so I think while it is easy to sort of dismiss the experience now that we've learned more about it, I don't think we can dismiss how Harry felt about it, particularly with his wife and his mother-in-law in the car.
Kevin, the cost of the pictures to show that have been filmed is thousands and thousands of pounds. We aren't showing them this morning, but the cost is enormous. So the driver for all the paparazzi, there is a huge value to them. And one of the issues that we have is when the tabloid newspapers, when the broadsheet newspapers, when news services are all going to pay that money, that's not going to stop the driver for them to try and get that picture, is it?
No, that's right. And while I doubt anybody would pay for it here, they will in the States and around the world because they are... the royal connection gives them a status as a celeb couple. And paparazzi can be very intrusive and very aggressive. I heard the one you interviewed, and I was just smiling. You know, butter wouldn't melt in his mouth.
Sure.
Would he? Well, you know, what we got here is Harry, the moment I heard of it, you think, yep, he is incredibly sensitive to this, hypersensitive, and that's understandable. He lost his mother at the age of 12. He's spoken about his struggles since then and the pain that inflicted on him. But it also now appears to be, you know, what really happened. Recollections may vary, as the Queen once said, had a book which invaded the privacy of the rest of the royal family, but then he wants to guard his own, and you get into all these rather contradictory areas where it's gonna push up. Maybe right, something's happened, but maybe it was not quite as dramatic as their statement suggested.
It obviously felt for them that it was that dramatic, because I'm sure they were genuine in those fears. Anita, is there any way that they could have handled it differently? We know that they have concerns about the security and the provision of it anyway. We know there are court cases related to that. But they were going to a very high-profile event where, you know, you could argue that they will be expected. They weren't dropping the kids off at school. You know what I mean? They were going to a high-profile event.
They wanted the publicity.
They wanted the publicity for the cause. So, do you think there's an argument that they maybe could have handled getting those images differently?
I don't really think so. I really think that I find it hard to disagree with anything they put in the statement, especially the part that you just read out, Kate, which says, you know, no one should be put in harm's way for the sake of high-profile photographs. And it seems like whether or not it was a kind of high-speed chase or not, there were moments where they say that, you know, people's safety were compromised, or, you know, passengers, pedestrians, etc., you know, were potentially put in harm's way in pursuit of photos sort of them, I presume, travelling, or perhaps they were trying to ascertain the location of where they were staying. So I kind of think that actually, you know, when you do an event of that kind, obviously you want people to photograph, and they're rightly and able to photograph that moment. But then you travelling to your home where you want to feel secure, I'm not sure that kind of is the same remit. And I do think that we have seen instances, not just involving the royal family, where paparazzi can be what I would describe as overzealous, and I think that there is a reason why, you know, in our Puritan age where we want to see what people that we know and who are famous are doing all the time, that can be quite dangerous, and I think there is a culture here.
Yeah, if people are going through red lights, cars on pavement, almost...
reversing back down a one-way street.
If they were, you would expect arrests and summonses, but the NYPD has said there are not. Now, it seems they wanted to keep private, concealed, secret where they were staying, who they were staying with. I don't blame them for doing that, but if you're a celeb couple who've been to a very glitzy event, and yes, they've made themselves available for pictures going in and out, I'm sure the organisers of the award wanted that anyway to get publicity, can you just turn it off later and keep quiet where you're staying and who you're with?
That balance is so hard to strike. Victoria, I wonder what the feeling is towards Harry and Meghan in America at the moment, because clearly we've just had the coronation here. Harry came in very briefly and then left very quickly. It was his son's birthday on the same day, of course, and we all understand the conflict that there has been since his book was released over here. Has there been sort of a change in the attitude towards them? And I wonder how a story like this, particularly in light of some of the sort of contradictions that are coming via the sort of the officials in New York about their version of events, will land.
It's quite a difficult question to answer in the grand scheme of things, simply because this country is so vast. So people often just think about what's happening in New York and Los Angeles as if that big part in the middle didn't exist. And so, yes, there are people that love Harry and Meghan. Equally, there are people that don't like them at all. There are some that don't care. There are some who don't know who they are. But I was quite surprised by some of the coverage today. As more and more details trickled out, there was a little bit of ridicule. There was a little bit of people kind of joking about the type of language that was used. And that's why it did them a terrible disservice. Because like everybody there, I don't doubt for one second that Harry and Meghan were genuinely alarmed about what was happening, perhaps scared for their own safety, but they also suggested they were scared about the safety of other people. But seeing a difference, I think, this time around about how this is covered versus how it might have been covered a year ago, particularly with New Yorkers. New Yorkers are a cynical bunch, and I think the local New York press has been especially tough on Harry and Meghan by suggesting that this city suddenly was overrun by paparazzi and they were in great danger. But I do think there are questions that have to be asked as regards to Harry and Meghan's security detail, because you have to wonder why there wasn't a clearer procedure in place. Who was it who thought it was appropriate to drive around for an hour and a quarter if the scenes were as chaotic as they were? And Harry and Meghan are such a high-profile couple. They are individuals with a high price on their head. And so I think a lot of these questions need to be directed to their security team as well.
I wonder if the fact that it was in New York, whereas normally in LA, their people are probably more used to them and there's maybe slightly less of a frenzy, had an impact. And like you say, some of those decisions, like, for instance, getting into a New York yellow cab, are unusual, aren't they? You can sort of see their thinking, but it's hard to imagine who might have advised that.
Absolutely. I mean, that was one of the things that struck me the most, because a New York taxi driver, yes, some could argue they drive defensively every day just trying to get in and around the city, but they're not driving with flashbulbs in their faces. They're not driving with two members of the royal family in the back, with a security detail person in the front telling them where to go and what to do. So it just felt like their security team was absolutely chaotic as well. And that is simply not acceptable. anytime you're looking after a high-profile individual, there need to be procedures in place. And I don't profess to be a security expert, but this just felt like there were a lot of errors made and that added to the confusion of everything. And so I think questions do need to be asked in terms of who is protecting them and what they can do moving forwards to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Victoria, it's great to get your opinion. And you're being stalked throughout that whole interview. Your cat is playing...
Sorry.
It's just brilliant. Absolutely gripped by where the cat's running around and what she's trying to capture in the back of shot.
Cats have a wonderful way of being present and also
Upstaging.
brilliantly disinterested as well.
Thank you, Victoria, for your thoughts. Kevin,
Thank you.
Do we have stricter rules over here with regards to paparazzi and the selling of footage and rules than they do in America?
I find it hard to believe this would have happened in London. And in fact, when they were here, I can't recall it happening like this. That's not to say they didn't have cameras in their faces at times they didn't like. And they moved to the US in part because they thought they'd have greater privacy and security, and it does not seem to be the case. So I think no, look, newspapers now are under enormous pressure from IPSO, the Independent Press Standards Organisation, which is the regulator. It's much tougher than it has been before. There's a greater awareness of the right to privacy. In fact, there are privacy laws in place in the UK which aren't in place in the US. So I think they've, in terms of privacy, I think they've made a mistake. That's leaving aside arguments, well, they invaded their own privacy, privacy of the royal family, so they haven't got any of their own. Yes, everybody has a right to privacy of being treated with some respect, and also certainly their safety not endangered. And my instant reaction was sympathy for them, for him, because of the way his mother died.
You just know what's going through his mind.
Now all the questions are coming. Did it really happen the way you said?
The frustration there, Anita, is, of course, you can't take away, as Kate was saying, the fear that they must have had, but it starts undermining the credibility of what they're saying. And that sort of you feel sort of at a strange juxtaposition with the two stories there, because I don't want to not have empathy and sympathy for what they went through.
Yeah, and we don't know at this stage exactly what transpired, but it feels as though some of the details, like the length of the journey, it's very hard to believe that anyone was genuinely trying to get somewhere for 2 hours in New York. So clearly there was something that went on for far too long in terms of whether it's paparazzi pursuit or them trying to get away from the area where they had just received the award. And it feels to me as though, ultimately, obviously this is particularly traumatic for Harry and Meghan, but actually I think this would be difficult for most people who exist in the private, in the public, but also would want a degree of privacy. And I think that in most instances, most accidents that happen, in streets, they are, completely, accidental, and they happen as a result of bad luck or bad circumstances or someone not paying attention. But the idea that people could be threatened because of pursuit of photographs of them, I think is a very difficult thing. And this is not just specific to Harry and Meghan, but the broader society that means that, pursuit of this kind of thing is allowed to sort of be considered to be a reasonable thing that could endanger people. And that just doesn't seem sensible to me.
No, I think you're right. I think, but that's the problem, as we say, about taking different stories and piecing it all together. Well, thank goodness nobody was hurt.
The value. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of pounds to show that footage. So the people that have taken the footage are getting a lot of money from it.
So the driver
which feels
remains.
wrong.
Yes.
No, that just feels wrong,